I walked out on my husband after he threw red wine in my face for glancing at another man. I drove 4 hours to my sister's place and filed for divorce that same week. I remember the exact moment my life shattered into a million pieces. It was at a coworker's birthday party, in front of dozens of people, when my husband, the man I loved, the man I married, deliberately threw an entire glass of red wine in my face. Not for an argument, not for a fight, but because he thought I had looked at another man. I'm telling you this now because, looking back, that moment was a brutal, shocking turning point. For years, I'd been living in a subtle cage, but that night, the bars became terrifyingly real. I was just chatting with a new woman at the snack table, probably talking about something completely mundane, when my husband's friend walked by and grabbed a chip. Like any guest, I glanced up at him. It couldn't have been more than 3 seconds. No flirtation, no smile, just a fleeting acknowledgement of another person nearby. From across the room, my husband saw it. I saw him coming, a dark figure with a glass of red wine in his hand. He didn't say a word. He just walked right up to me and threw the drink. Straight at my face. The wine stung my eyes, ran down my nose, soaking my white blouse, staining it crimson. My vision blurred. He looked out at the stunned faces of the party guests and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's what she gets for looking at other men." The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. No one spoke. The friend I'd supposedly flirted with stared at the ground, probably wishing he could just disappear. The woman I'd been talking to handed me a napkin, her eyes wide with something I couldn't quite decipher, and then she quietly walked away, as if avoiding eye contact would somehow erase what had just happened. My husband grabbed my arm, his grip bruising, and said, "We're leaving." I followed him to the car, my mind a jumbled mess of confusion and shame. The wine still burned my eyes, still dripped from my face, a sticky, sour mess. On the drive home, he started in. He told me I had embarrassed him, humiliated him, that I'd been flirting with his friend in public. I tried to explain, my voice trembling, that I had only glanced at the man, that I hadn't been flirting. He cut me off. "Enough," he said. "You should know better." That phrase echoed in my head. You should know better. It was a familiar refrain, one he'd used so many times before to justify punishing me for minor transgressions. I'd always rationalized those incidents away, forgotten them, or pretended they weren't as bad as they felt. Like the time in our first year of marriage when I laughed too long at another man's joke at dinner. He hadn't thrown anything then, but he'd ignored me for 4 excruciating days until I'd apologized for disrespecting him. Or in our third year, when he said I dressed too nicely for work, asking who I was trying to impress. After that, I started wearing baggy, shapeless clothes, anything to avoid conflict. In the 4th year, he checked my phone while I slept, furious because a male coworker had texted me about a project deadline. Even after I showed him the entire conversation, proving it was innocent, he didn't speak to me for a week. Miscommunication was my go-to excuse for every problem. I thought he loved me too much, that he was just jealous. I genuinely believed that being more mindful of my behavior around men was the solution. But throwing wine in my face in front of dozens of people? That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was intentional. That was abuse. And in that moment, as the wine dried on my skin, I confessed to myself, with a horrifying clarity, that all of it had been abuse. Back home, I washed the wine from my face in the bathroom, the water cold and stinging. He followed me, standing in the doorway, watching. He mumbled an apology, but then he said, "You made me." He said I wouldn't have to learn if I just understood how others saw me, how much he loved me, how much he cared about my actions. I looked in the mirror. For the first time in 5 years, I saw him clearly. He wasn't sorry. He was justifying. He didn't love me. He ruled me. He didn't want to teach me respect. He wanted to instill fear. Disgust. Yes, I understood. I promised to improve, my voice flat. He hugged me from behind, a triumphant smile on his face, convinced I would let him believe everything was fine. And I wanted him to assume everything was fine. Monday morning, he left for work at 8:30, just like any other day. I called in sick. Then I packed. Just clothes. 3 suitcases. My important documents. My grandmother's jewelry. I left everything else. Every memory, every piece of furniture, every shared possession. I drove 4 hours to my sister's house. As she opened the door and saw my face, she asked no questions. She simply made me tea and said I could stay as long as I wanted. That night, my husband started calling. I stayed silent. 15 calls later, he started texting. A barrage of worried, angry, threatening, apologetic, desperate messages. After 4 cycles of calls and texts, I blocked his number. My sister recommended a domestic dispute lawyer. My divorce was filed next week. My husband disagreed. I woke up Tuesday morning on my sister's couch, the dried wine in my hair, sticky and sour, the first thing I noticed. My neck ached from sleeping in an awkward position. My phone lay face down on the coffee table. When I picked it up, it showed 42 missed calls from him, all from numbers I'd blocked last night. But he was calling from unfamiliar lines, borrowed phones, company phones. I deleted the notifications before checking voicemails. I heard my sister moving around the kitchen, the gurgle of the coffee maker, cabinet doors opening and closing. My body felt like water as I sat up. But my mind was clearer than the night before, when panic had been my only guide. I had left him. I had left my life, my home, everything. There was no going back. My sister brought me a steaming mug of coffee, her eyes kind, no judgment for my appearance or the lingering smell of wine. She sat at her kitchen table, pulled out a notebook and pen. She suggested we make a list of everything I needed to do. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't write, so I gently handed her the pen. She started writing as I spoke. Retrieve bank accounts. Change address. House documents. The list expanded, 2 pages by the time we were done. Each item felt impossibly huge. Yet, looking at it, I knew this was permanent. This was real. I thought about the 3 suitcases I'd brought. My grandmother's jewelry in my dresser drawer. My forgotten wedding photo albums. The whole of my life, distilled into so little. My sister kept writing. Cancel joint credit cards. Change beneficiaries. Update emergency contacts. Her handwriting looped across the page, the pen scratching a rhythm of urgent tasks. When she finished, she handed me the notebook. My throat tightened looking at it. She squeezed my hand. We'll take it one by one, she said. After a long shower, washing the wine smell from my hair and skin, I called work. On the second ring, my boss, Miles Carter, answered. My voice cracked as I requested the week off for a family emergency. I hoped he didn't hear the unshed tears. He paused, then softened. Of course, he said. Take whatever time you need. Are you okay? I agreed that I was, a practiced response from 5 years of conditioning. I heard his calm breathing on the other end. Just rest, he said. Your job will be waiting. I cried again, properly this time, on my sister's guest bed after hanging up. My sister took me to the bank Wednesday morning. I sat in the parking lot for 12 minutes, staring at the glass doors, the potted plants inside. Entering those doors felt irreversible. Taking our money. Making it mine. My husband would understand my seriousness then. A desk clerk, professional and polite, asked how she could help. I need to separate my joint accounts with my husband, I said. She smiled professionally, but I saw her eyes flick to a colleague. I pretended not to notice their shared glance. She asked for my ID and account information. My hands trembled filling out the paperwork. She explained that legally, because both names were on the account, I could withdraw funds or close it. The implication was clear. She discussed this with other women sitting in that very chair. The process took 3 hours. She had to verify my identity 4 times, get manager approval, print old statements. My sister scrolled through her phone next to me, occasionally touching my shoulder. When it was done, the clerk handed me a folder with my new account information. The joint account was closed. The funds split evenly, half into my new account, half as a check made out to my husband. I looked at the check. $18,000. Half of our savings. It felt strange, like stealing from him, even though it was legally mine. It felt wrong, but also for the first time in a long time, fair. We drove to another bank across town, where I opened an account he couldn't access. The young representative there asked no questions. I deposited half my savings, $18,000. If I was careful, it would last 7 months. It gave me choices. It gave me space to decide. That night, I lay awake on my sister's couch, thinking about money. I knew my husband would notice the empty account in the morning. He'd see the check. He'd realize I was serious. He'd know I wasn't coming back. Thursday came too fast. My sister drove me to court because my hands were shaking too much to hold the wheel. It was an enormous gray building, imposing and cold, with metal detectors at each entrance. People moved purposefully, as if they knew exactly where they were going. I had no idea. My sister held my arm as I emptied my pockets and put my purse on the conveyor belt at security. Inside, a guard let us in. We stared at a directory board in the main lobby, dozens of unfamiliar room numbers and department names. Morgan Hale had texted me the room number, but the building layout was disorienting. A uniformed woman asked if we needed help. My sister explained we were looking for the family court clerk. The woman pointed left, down a hallway. Fourth door on the right. In the clerk's office, we saw people crying, lawyers in suits arguing quietly on benches. A short queue snaked towards a long, bulletproof glass counter. I gave my name. The woman behind the glass, looking utterly exhausted, handed me a clipboard with forms. The forms demanded everything: my name, my husband's name, our address, length of marriage, children, domestic violence, restraining order. I stopped writing twice to shake my cramped hand. She'd seen hundreds of women fill out these forms. When I finished, she took the clipboard, typed for what seemed like forever on her computer. She printed more papers, inserted slips with numbers, and told us to wait in courtroom 4 for the judge to call my case. Courtroom 4 was adorned with a raised platform for the judge and church pew-like wooden benches. About 24 people waited for their cases. My sister and I sat in the back row. I tried to read the papers in my lap, but the legal language made everything sound cold and official, like my marriage was just a contract ending, not 5 years of my life. A side door opened, and a bailiff ordered everyone to stand. A black-robed judge entered. She had dark hair pulled back in a bun and looked younger than I expected, possibly in her 40s. She sat on the bench, reviewed paperwork, and called cases by number. Some took 2 minutes, others 20. I watched a man argue that his ex-wife shouldn't have full custody, but the judge interrupted him mid-sentence, stating that showing up drunk to pick up his children forfeited his right to argue. Then my number was called. My legs shook walking to the front of the courtroom. The judge examined my paperwork, then me. She asked if I wanted a temporary restraining order for assault and threatening behavior. I spoke too quietly when I said yes. She asked about the party. I told her about the wine, about my husband pounding on my sister's door. When she requested proof, I showed her the police report from that night and photos of my wine-stained clothes before washing them. She carefully examined the photos, then asked if my husband was violent. I automatically said no. But then I stopped. The silent treatment was violent. The harsh phone calls, the allegations, the isolation, all of it. Yes, I said, my voice steadier. He was controlling and threatening for 5 years. She took computer notes, then looked at me again. She asked where my sister, my husband, and I worked. I gave her all the addresses. More notes were typed and printed. She signed a document, handed it to the bailiff, who gave it to me. A restrictive order. My husband was ordered to stay 600 feet from me, my sister, my workplace, and my sister's home immediately. She promised a process server would deliver the papers to him at work tomorrow and arrest him if he disobeyed. I understand, I said. She called the next case and advised me to stay safe. 12 minutes. That's how long it took. My sister squeezed my hand as we left the courtroom. In the hallway, I sobbed. I cried on her shoulder in a corner until I ran out of tears. Driving home, I stared at the restraining order. 600 feet. We had to maintain that distance after 5 years of marriage. It felt like too much space, yet somehow, not enough. Friday, I went through my 3 suitcases. My belongings were laid out on my sister's guest bed for evaluation. For jeans, 6 shirts, 2 dresses, underwear, socks, toothbrush, makeup, my birth certificate, SSN, and grandmother's jewelry. That was it. In my eagerness to escape, I had grabbed only essentials. I forgot my winter coat and sweaters, my travel and wedding photo albums, the recipe box my grandmother had given me, which I promised my mother I'd protect, my favorite books, the Christmas blanket my sister gave me 3 years ago. Everything was still at his house. I called Morgan Hale. She suggested sending a police escort back to retrieve more belongings after he received the restraining order. She advised waiting until he was fully aware of the legal consequences before acting. I had to wait. I slept under a borrowed blanket at my sister's house, wearing the same 6 shirts, while my belongings were in a house I couldn't return to. Monday morning, before I finished my coffee, Morgan Hale called. His lawyer, Dylan Pierce, had delivered his service response. My husband was contesting the divorce, and, according to the letter, He expected me to pay half the legal fees because I had abandoned the marriage without cause. Morgan Hale read parts of the letter over the phone, and I felt sick. Abandoned without explanation. 5 years of controlling behavior and wine in my face was not without cause. I didn't just wake up and end our marriage without warning. Morgan Hale, her voice firm, said this was a common intimidation tactic. She assured me his claims would fail in court because I had evidence of abuse and threats. But, she warned, the divorce would take longer and cost more without his cooperation. He would prolong and complicate the process. When I asked how long and how much, she estimated 7 months and several thousand more in legal fees. The weight settled on my shoulders. 7 more months. 7 more months of court dates, legal battles, and his lawyers and paperwork meant to punish me. My freedom was 7 months away. I woke up in knots Wednesday morning, knowing I'd face him in court. Morgan Hale drove me to the courthouse at 9:30, explaining the hearing. The judge would review the TTRO and extend it if there was a continuing threat. His attorney would oppose it. I might have to testify. The ancient marble floors and high ceilings of the courthouse echoed every sound, making it even more intimidating. After security, we found the right courtroom on the 4th floor. Morgan Hale checked in with the clerk while I tried to breathe on a hallway wooden bench. Then I saw him, walking down the hallway with his lawyer, Dylan. My husband wore a dark suit and tie, looking calm and professional, like he was going to a business meeting, not a hearing about abusing his wife. He looked at me with a neutral, almost worried expression, as if he was in the right and I was simply overreacting. Seeing that expression, I doubted everything. Was I overreacting? Was throwing wine really that bad? Maybe I should have tried harder to resolve things. Then I remembered the sting of the wine in my eyes, how it soaked my clothes, everyone watching. How he justified grabbing my arm. How I'd changed my clothes, walked on eggshells for 4 years, apologized for his mistakes. We sat at separate tables in the courtroom after the clerk called us in. The judge, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a bun, looked exhausted from hearing too many cases. Dylan stood up first. He claimed my husband was devoted, but made one mistake in a stressful situation. He said the wine incident was a one-time loss of control after I had provoked him by flirting with his friend. He implied I had thrown myself at someone right in front of my husband. He also claimed my husband went to my sister's house just to check on his wife, who had disappeared without explanation. It made it sound like I was the problem, and my husband was just responding to my bad behavior. Listening to him made me sick. I held the edge of the table, steadying my shaking hands. I focused on breathing as Morgan Hale squeezed my arm under the table. The judge read the police report from the night my husband showed up at my sister's. The officer reported him as aggressive and threatening, pounding on the door and refusing to leave. Morgan Hale then presented the photos of my wine-stained blouse, which the judge considered evidence. She asked if my husband had any comments on the police report. He started to respond, but she raised her hand. She extended the restraining order for 7 months. She ordered him to stay 600 feet from me, my office, and my sister's house. She threatened immediate arrest and jail time for any violations. She spoke firmly, looking directly at him. Dylan objected, but the judge simply stated that my husband was a threat. The hearing ended in under 40 minutes. I left the courthouse exhausted, but relieved. Morgan Hale reminded me that divorces involve many hearings and legal battles, but that the law protected me. Approaching me would have consequences. During lunch at a courthouse diner, Morgan Hale outlined the next steps for the divorce. That night, my sister's neighbor, Deb Mills, brought over a foil-wrapped casserole. She'd heard I was struggling and offered to bring dinner. She came in, placed the casserole on the kitchen counter, and then, completely out of the blue, offered to connect me with a friend who managed rental properties. I was surprised by her kindness. I had expected people to judge me, to probe me, or to tell me to work harder to save my marriage. But Deb smiled and said she'd been divorced years earlier and knew how hard it was. She wrote her friend's number on a piece of paper and told me to call when I was ready. After she left, I stared at the phone number on the kitchen table. The idea of having my own apartment felt both thrilling and terrifying. My sister went to bed, and I spent the rest of the night looking for rentals online. Many were either too expensive, too far from work, or in unsafe neighborhoods. The nice apartments in good areas were simply out of my price range, especially with legal fees looming. I realized, with a jolt, how financially dependent I had become during my marriage. My husband had always made the big financial decisions, where we lived, what we could afford. I let him lead because it was easier than arguing. Now, I looked at tiny studios in sketchy neighborhoods, wondering if I could live on ramen and rent. The search made me feel incredibly vulnerable. While browsing more apartment listings on my sister's couch on Thursday afternoon, my phone vibrated with an email notification. It was from an unknown sender. The subject line, "We need to talk." I opened it. It was a lengthy message from my husband, filled with accusations about how I was destroying our marriage and wasting 5 years. He offered a half-hearted apology for the wine incident, then quickly accused me of irritating him, causing him to lose control. He claimed he loved me unconditionally and couldn't understand why I was harming us. The next paragraph called me selfish and cruel for getting a restraining order and making him look like a monster. He suggested I resolve this at home, if I truly loved him. Finally, he asked me to call him for an adult conversation. Reading it made my chest tighten and my hands shake. I immediately called Morgan Hale and read her the email. She demanded I forward it to her immediately. She explained that using a fake email account to contact me was a clear violation of the restraining order. She said the email perfectly demonstrated the cycle of manipulation and abuse she had warned me about. Apologies and declarations of love mixed with blame and accusations. He was still trying to make me responsible for his actions. She advised me to report the email to the police and, under no circumstances, to respond. I emailed the police and Morgan Hale. Within hours, a detective called to say they had traced the email to my husband's home IP address. An arrest for violating the restraining order was imminent. I was surprised by the mix of relief and guilt that washed over me. He had broken the law, but I still felt responsible somehow. The detective later confirmed they had arrested him at home. He would be held for 2 nights before posting bail. That week, Harper Quinn and I had our usual nighttime therapy session. I shared the email, the arrest, and my lingering guilt. She showed me how years of my husband blaming me for his actions had ingrained this sense of guilt in me. She told me to separate his decisions from my reactions. He broke the restraining order. Emailing me was his choice, his decision, not mine. The rest of the session focused on recognizing when I was taking responsibility for others' actions. The following week, Morgan Hale called to say the divorce was officially in discovery. Bank statements, tax returns, pay stubs, and documentation of all assets and debts were required from both sides. She told me his lawyer had requested extensive documentation about my spending habits and work history, going back 6 years. Morgan Hale said this was another intimidation tactic, meant to intrude and overwhelm me. She said we would accept reasonable requests, but push back on anything excessive or irrelevant. I spent the weekend poring over bank statements and pay stubs. Reviewing my financial records felt incredibly intrusive, but it was necessary. Every purchase, every paycheck, every deposit, every bill I had paid during our marriage was laid bare. And that's when I found it. Hidden among the normal purchases, in just 4 months of statements, were charges I didn't recognize. $250 at an electronics store, $600 at a restaurant I'd never eaten at, and $1,500 at an online retailer I didn't recognize. He had increased the monthly payments, probably testing me, seeing if I'd notice. I texted Morgan Hale photos of each statement, asking if this was legal. She called back within 25 minutes. Her voice was grave. She told me to meet her at the police station tomorrow morning. My husband had committed identity theft and fraud. I felt sick seeing the total again. $9,000 I owed for things I never bought, without my consent. Opening accounts in someone else's name without permission is a crime, even between married people. And Morgan Hale said the credit card company would likely reverse the charges if we filed a police report. The next morning, Morgan Hale and I gave our statement to a detective in a small, sterile room at the police station. He asked how I found the card and if my husband had requested accounts in my name. I showed him my phone with the statements and confirmed I hadn't. The detective made copies of everything, saying they would investigate, but warned me these cases could take months. That afternoon, Morgan Hale helped me contact the credit card company. The representative was sympathetic and promised to investigate the fraud. She advised me not to pay the account during the dispute. While my sister and I cooked dinner that evening, her phone rang. She answered instantly, and her expression changed. Covering the mouthpiece, she whispered, "Your husband's parents want to talk." I shrugged. She nodded at me, then firmly told them I didn't want to talk, and that all communication needed to go through our lawyers. I could hear his mother's booming voice from the phone, discussing family and deals. My sister repeated that all communication must be legal before hanging up. She asked if I was okay. My hands shook as I agreed. Every night after work for weeks, I browsed apartment listings on my laptop. Many were still too expensive, too far, or in unsafe neighborhoods. One night, Deb Mills stopped by again. She mentioned her friend owned several rental properties in a quiet neighborhood about 35 minutes from work. "You should call the landlord," she urged. The next day, I called. I told him I was getting divorced and needed a place fast. I explained my situation to Gordy Lane, the landlord, who was incredibly sympathetic. He offered to help me with the security deposit, understanding my legal fees, and said he had a 2-bedroom available immediately. I drove to the apartment that weekend. It was small, but clean, with good locks on the doors and windows overlooking a quiet street. The kitchen was outdated but functional, and the bedroom fit my bed and dresser. Gordy mentioned that most of his tenants were single professionals or transitioning. I was grateful he asked few questions about my divorce. I signed the lease 2 days later. Just 3 months after leaving my husband, I moved on a Saturday. My sister helped me load my 3 suitcases and some new purchases into her car. We drove to my new apartment and carried everything up to the 3rd floor. Even though my few things were there, the space felt empty. That afternoon, my sister gave me a housewarming gift, an online-ordered security camera system. We spent the rest of the day installing cameras and reinforcing the locks on the front door and windows. By evening, the apartment felt secure. My sister hugged me goodbye, telling me to call if I needed anything. That first night alone, I barely slept. Every hallway or street sound made me sit up, checking my phone's security camera feed. I got up 5 times to double-check the door and window locks. I finally fell asleep around 3:30 a.m., but woke up exhausted. Harper Quinn listened to my account of sleepless nights at our therapy session that week. She explained that trauma causes hypervigilance, and that my brain was staying alert to protect me. She said time and safe practice would help. Work became my only distraction from the divorce, the apartment, the legal battles. One afternoon, 9 months after I left, Miles Carter called me into his office. I expected another project assignment. He motioned to the chair across from his desk and closed the door. He said he had been closely monitoring my work since I returned from leave and had seen unexpected growth. He said most people going through what I was would have slowed down, but mine had actually improved. He offered me a senior analyst position, a 25% raise, and leadership over the team's biggest clients. I sat there, stunned, still expecting punishment for taking up space or asking for too much. I started to decline his offer of time to think. "Yes," I said. "I accept." He smiled and told HR to drop the paperwork. The promotion would start next month. When I returned to my desk, I felt like I could finally make something good from the rubble. That night, I announced the promotion at the support group check-in, and the women applauded. Some asked if I would mentor a new member who had left her husband 3 weeks earlier and was in the same shame spiral I had been in for months. I said yes without thinking. Assisting someone else through what I'd been through felt like giving meaning to all of my pain. She was Lauren Brooks, and she looked as lost as my mirror image 8 months earlier. After the meeting, I gave her my number and told her to text me anytime she needed to talk or needed reassurance that she wasn't crazy. I met Lauren for coffee twice in the following weeks, helping her separate finances and hire a lawyer. Hearing her story made me realize how far I'd come. What had seemed impossible 9 months ago were now basic survival steps I could explain. My week revolved around the support group, where I could talk about my tough days without being judged or told to move on. Then, one evening, 10 months after leaving, as I made dinner in my apartment, I realized I hadn't thought about my ex-husband in 9 days. I hadn't obsessively checked locks, looked over my shoulder in parking lots, or planned what to say if he showed up. My constant hypervigilance was fading, so gradually I hadn't even noticed. I stood at my kitchen counter, crying into a cutting board full of chopped vegetables, because the absence of fear was almost as overwhelming as the fear itself. Confidence in my judgment was returning. The belief that looking at someone did not invite punishment. I had a good job I worked hard for. A safe apartment I owned. Friends who understood my struggles but supported me in my strength. I was learning to spot red flags, to set healthy boundaries, and to know that real love did not shrink me. I still carried the weight of what happened, in my body's reactions, in a cautious way of moving through the world. But I survived something I didn't think I could, and that meant more than I ever knew. I was proud of my transformation. I was someone who saw strength in herself, not shame.